Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're just gonna wait. I'll just wait just a second to let some people in. Oh, but good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be calling from today. But thank you for joining us today. I am Julie Montgomery, and I'm the Vice President of Membership and Partnership here at SID-US. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. For those that are new to SID-US, we are a membership-driven organization that brings together people and organizations interested in international development. We bring them together, we convene them to connect, learn, and share with each other. Our community represents people from all stages of their career, so from students to retirees, and we represent a lot of different types of organizations working in this sector, such as NGOs, universities, small businesses, large private sector companies, think tanks, and more. We are a neutral convener. We don't do any advocacy. We do believe that by bringing in as many different perspectives to our global town square, what we call, leads to better development solutions. So thank you again for joining us today. Today's event is Adapting to Change, Pursuing a Career in International Development and Beyond. We have a really great lineup of speakers today. We are co-hosting the event with NASPA, which is the Network of Schools of Public Policy Affairs and Administration. Um, for those that are familiar with all the changes at USAID and work in global development, you know that there have been a lot of changes, and it has had a negative impact on many, many in this community. Thousands of international development professionals have lost their livelihoods, and are looking for the next job. We also here at SID-US have been impacted and are trying to evolve with these changes. So although we've had to postpone some of our big events, which some of you may know about, our annual conference, our career fairs, we continue to provide events like today, these sort of smaller events that are on topics that we believe the community needs. As I mentioned, we have brought together a great, incredible panel representing international development professionals at different stages of their career, with experience in many different sectors. I'm sorry, well, sectors too, yeah, and companies and organizations. But before we get started, I did want to talk about things to note, three housekeeping points. So we're recording the session, and we'll be recording it and posting it on YouTube. There's closed captioning. You can set that up on your own individual settings. And then also, third, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We may not get to all of them today, but we will try to answer as many as possible. Okay, so next slide. So now on to the speakers. So Scott Webb will be introducing the speakers, but I just wanted to introduce Scott. I've known Scott for many, many years. I actually knew him at my previous organization Interaction. And when I came to SID-US, Scott reached out to me to talk about, okay, what can we do together? He is at MISS, working at MISS as a career advisor, which most people, if you don't know, is the Middlebury Institute for International Studies in Monterey. So like I said, I've worked with Scott. He came, he's presented at several events. And I've always been very impressed. He's so committed to the sector and has always been helping young professionals and students and providing advice on what they can do next in their own career. And he makes these connections with people, and he tries to hold events like today. He reached out to me about putting an event, and here we are. So Scott, thank you for joining us. Before I turn it over to you, well, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I would like you to say a few things about your experience.
Cool. Thank you, Julie. It's always great working with you. For any of you who don't know Julie, I mean, she was with Interaction for, the bulk of her career up until coming to SID, basically right after grad school, right? You went to Interaction, right?
Yeah, I
So yeah,
did.
you spent all this time,
Did.
and Interaction, being a membership board of all nonprofits focused on international development and humanitarian assistance, she had her finger on the pulse of the industry. So going to SID was like a natural, evolution for you. So, it's always been great working with you. You've been always very helpful and generous with your time. So thank you. Little bit about, I want to talk a little bit about NASPA. The reason I did this event as NASPA and not just like for my own students is because where I'm coming from, I was an international development professional for about 7 or 8 years. I was a Peace Corps volunteer at the end of the 90s in Niger and West Africa that got me interested in international development. I came back from Peace Corps. I was a recruiter for Peace Corps for several years in San Francisco. I eventually came here to what was then the Monterey Institute um, in the mid 2000s for my MPA. I came here because it was a really top international development school. Also, I have family nearby. But you know, for me, I was introduced to an ecosystem of USAID implementing partners, and it became clear to me that, wow, this is a great, rich ecosystem. The funding's really steady. There's lots of really cool professionals that I look up to, and that's the direction I think I can go, is I can be in that system and I'll be fine. Um, and then, I worked for about 7 years in international development. I was a recruiter with IRD, now Bluemont. So I was a recruiter for them for a year, and then I was a program officer for another 4 years, working on a lot of different kinds of programs. I learned all about managing USAID cooperative agreements, grants, and contracts, and subcontracts and subgrants, and all these kinds of things. Then, I was a program officer with Relief International for a couple of years. Again, BPRM, OFDA, or now Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. Learned all about that kind of stuff, and all these humanitarian projects. And then I was a recruiter with Catholic Relief Services for a year between 2014 and 15 on their humanitarian response team. Most of that funding was CRS funding, like private donation funding, but then segueing into the early recovery stuff funded by the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance for the most part. So that whole system was like a part of my life and my career. And even coming here to the Middlebury Institute and this job as an advisor to graduate students interested in going into international development has been focused on getting people into that ecosystem. And in January, with the stop work order to USAID, that's been just blown up. And so, I feel heartbroken in many ways because I'm seeing the industry that I grew up as a professional in being, eviscerated. Also, it's heartbreaking to see, just post after post after post on LinkedIn of, open to work, open to work, open to work. I loved my colleagues. I loved my job. Now I'm looking for something else. So that's been really hard. So at some point, I decided, well, I have a job, thankfully. Um, but my job is to help people figure this out and figure out how to leverage what you've done in international development, either as a student or as a young professional or as an experienced professional, and how do we move into this new reality. And so that's the reason that we did this call with SID and the White Julie, and it has been so generous. And this is the other reason that I opened it up to NASPA, because I'm on the employer relations committee. Typically every semester we have different kinds of events that we host that are for the benefit of all member schools, which are basically most of the schools of public policy and public administration across the United States. So welcome to, all the grad students that got an email from your career advisor, and to the career advisors, of our fellow NASPA schools. So just want to say thank you for that. Anyway, that's me, and that's where I'm coming from. I'm really excited to talk to the panelists we have today. Um, on the call, we've got Sonia Anderson. She's the Executive Vice President of International Network at United Way Worldwide. We've also got Brett Schreiner, Membership Associate with the Global Business Alliance. And we've got Yaniv Sneer, the Director of Possibilities at HeroX. Possibilities HeroX? You'll have to explain your organization to me. Um, in any case, so, each of you comes from a different place and a different set of experiences. And so we attempted to get a panel that could cover, some different aspects that are hopefully useful to the community. Again, feel free to queue up any questions you have in the chat, and we'll try to answer them both, on the call and in the chat. Um, so, so yeah, let's start with Sonia. I mean, we literally just met about half an hour ago. So, I'm so excited to talk to you. You have, really rich experiences across a variety of um, different different organizations. Can you just tell us about like your career and how you went from like maybe being a graduate student to across this mission-driven landscape that you've been in for the last, 20 plus years?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Hi, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. Yeah, as I like to say, I've had a lot of jobs. So the short or medium-sized version of this story is, I'm from a small town in Mississippi. I am the daughter of public school teachers. I grew up in a family of educators, and I think somewhere along the line, I was sort of, instilled with this idea of to whom much is given, much is expected. And I think whether I wanted to or not, I was kind of oriented towards this nonprofit world and this world of service and servant leadership. When I graduated from college, I went back home to Mississippi. I went to Yale undergrad. I went back home to Mississippi and I taught high school for 2 years through not Teach for America, but sort of an alternative teacher certification program that the state of Mississippi hosted. And it really was life changing for me. When I tell my story, I often talk about two pivotal moments in my 20s. The first one was the first 2 years that I spent teaching, which really helped me understand for the first time, start to think about systems and structure and policy and how those things impact people in their day-to-day life. And the second thing that happened that was really significant to me was a year that I spent in Ghana, in West Africa, and also in my early 20s on a Rotary International Fellowship. And I walked away from that experience knowing three things about myself. The first one is that I came to understand that the world was big and vast, much bigger than the small town in Mississippi that I came from, and I wanted to see all of it. And I think you're either hardwired to love that kind of thing or you're not, and I definitely was. The second thing I figured out about myself at the ripe old age of 24 was that I wanted to do good things in the world. And I didn't know what that meant because again, I was 24, but I had a sense that I wanted to devote my time and my attention and my efforts to a higher purpose. And then the third thing that I figured out is that I was going to have to figure it out on my own because no one in my family had ever done anything like this. So see my earlier point about small town in Mississippi. But thankfully, I was able to build connections, and sort of create this trajectory for myself. After I taught and after I got back from the year in Ghana, I spent a couple of years in New York at the Ford Foundation. So that introduced me to the world of philanthropy and really helped me understand the not-for-profit sector in a way that I had never been exposed to, but really come to appreciate it as a system of interventions. So I spent a couple of years at Ford, and while I was at Ford, I just happened to be working with a program officer on a set of grants to support girls' education and gender equity in Africa. And I just gotten back from that year in Ghana, and it all just kind of came together. I got super interested in that work. And after my time at Ford, Ford at the time had a young professionals program. So for 20 somethings, right, to come and spend a couple of years at the foundation, work really closely with the program officer, support them with their portfolio of giving. And then you had to leave. They were going to launch you into the world of nonprofit service. And so at the end of my 2 years, I ended up getting a job at Creative Associates, which I assume many of you know. And it was my entree into the world of international development. And I spent 2 years at Creative working on projects that focused on gender equity and girls' education, primarily in West Africa, but a little bit in the Caribbean. And I thought, aha, this is it. I figured it out. I stumbled my way into it, but this is where I'm meant to be. So I did that work for a couple of years. I met some wonderful folks, including some people I see on this call. And at the end of those 2 years, thought I actually really want to devote my time, my attention, my intellectual energies to this work. Like I think this is my thing. And so I decided to press pause and go to grad school because up until then I don't want to say winging it. That's not true. I was sort of applying my best self to it, but my best self was not an international development person. So I pressed pause and I took 5 years and went to Harvard and got my doctorate with a focus on international development and policy. And it was one of the best things I have ever done. It really sort of solidified my commitment to this space, I think, and really helped me build the connections, build the networks, and figure out what my particular place in this space could and should look like in a way that I just, I didn't necessarily have a blueprint or a roadmap. After I finished my doctorate, I moved to Chicago. I got a pretty cool job doing some pretty cool stuff, and continue to call Chicago home to this day. So I'm happy to talk more about it over the course of this conversation. But I think if anything, the takeaway for me is that number one, you never know where a given path is going to lead you. And number two, I think so often we get fixated on like the big picture, the end goal. And what I have learned is sometimes life is just a series of steps, just, one foot in front of the other, in front of the other. I think never has that been more true than today in this current climate, and in this world that we're all trying to navigate in these unprecedented times. I yearn for the time when we're back to just like precedented times, because unprecedented is kind of sucks. But right now we're in unprecedented times. But I would just encourage folks to just, one foot in front of the other, as you figure out how to navigate your path forward.
Thanks, Sonia. That's awesome. I wanted to ask before we go too much further, like you having worked at, so your journey, like working at Creative, you're in that USAID world, right? That the USAID implementing partner space with all the, the various restrictions and the bureaucracy and all that stuff. And then, you finish grad school and then you move into like a new mission driven era. Like to what extent were you leveraging the experience, like the actual like getting things done experience from working at a place like Creative for as long as you did? Like how is that, how have you incorporated that into this other world? And what are the main differences that you may have seen?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I came to Creative from philanthropy, and I consider myself professionally, I call myself a line jumper. So about half of my life has been in the philanthropic sector, basically giving away money. The other half of my career has been in the not-for-profit sector, either asking for money or figuring out what to do with the money that we received. And I actually love having those two perspectives. I think when I'm in philanthropy, I'm a better funder because I understand what the work is. And when I'm on the implementation side, I understand how funders think and some of the things that they are looking for and some of the decisions that they're actually trying to make. But when I went to Creative, I had just spent a couple of years at the Ford Foundation. At that time, Ford was the largest foundation in the world. So that was pre-Gates, pre-Chan Zuckerberg, pre-Bezos, all of those things. It was the sort of intellectual and cultural hub of civil society at the time. And I can remember having these moments where I thought, oh my God, I'm so busy. Oh my God, I have so much work. Oh my God. And with all due respect to my philanthropic colleagues, philanthropy busy is different than nonprofit actually trying to hustle and move the needle and change society kind of busy. It's two different thresholds. So when I came to Creative, I realized that I actually had not been as busy as I thought I had been when I was at the Ford Foundation. Creative taught me what real busy looked like, but Creative also taught me what action looked like, right? Not ideation, and there's a time and a place for that. Not theory, there's a time and a place for that. Not research, there's absolutely a time and place for that. But Creative in my time in the international development sector taught me how do you take all of that and actually do something with it to actually drive change. And I think, if anything, that has been such a strong theme throughout my career. It's the reason why I have a doctorate, but didn't want to be an academic. I was really clear about that from the outset, because I've always thought of myself as a doer and wanted to be close to the action. And I absolutely credit Creative for helping set me on that path.
That's awesome. I have two unrelated questions. Number one, getting a doctorate, how that affected the kinds of opportunities that were available to you. And, for many people on the call, like we were saying in our conversation earlier, like, I mean, um, you know, what do you think of, the option that many people may like ride out this this new unprecedented time
Yeah.
by going back to grad school? And, do you think that's a viable path to go back either to get a master's or a PhD? And like, what do you think are the benefits of getting a PhD? My second question down the road after you talk about that is I'm really curious about the work United Way is doing that you're involved with, because I know United Way is really, it's like everywhere. And that, they're all very unique, different, like there's a United Way Monterey, there's a United Way Santa Cruz, there's, almost every metropolitan area has their own United Way. And I know it's very decentralized, but I'm just curious, about that work. But
Yeah.
maybe first about the doctorate.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak about that. It's funny. So I was one of those people who, I was going to just get my bachelor's and then I was done with school. If you had told me at 18, 19 that I would have a doctorate, I would have laughed in your face and I don't know, maybe smacked you. I mean, it was so not on my radar screen at all. And I will share with you that I was working at Creative. I was in Morocco on a project, and I was with a colleague who was a consultant that Creative had brought on to help with this particular project. And I'll never forget one day we were talking, and she said to me, if you think you want to stay in this space, you are a woman, at the time younger, much younger, working in what can sometimes be very traditional patriarchal context. If you were going to stay in the space, you should think about getting a doctorate because right or wrong, right? Titling and credentialing sometimes matters in certain circles. And it was a passing comment, but it landed and clearly it stuck. I had never thought about this before the day that she said it. I remember it so well, but she planted the seed and I thought about it and I realized that she was probably right. The other thing I noticed, I have been thinking about chief of party positions and that kind of thing, sort of imagining what 2 or 3 jobs down the line might look like. And I noticed that many, if not all of them, required a doctorate. And, I'm nothing if not pragmatic. And so for me, I thought, okay, well, if I have to get a doctorate in order to do this thing that I ultimately want to do, then I'll go get a doctorate. I think there are 2 types of people who get PhDs. I tend to often divide. There are 2 types of people. There are 3 types. There are 2 types of people who get PhDs. They're the people who really want to get super heady and academic and understand the nature of reason and why and humankind and hermeneutics and all of those things. And then there are people like me who are like, okay, bada bing, bada bing. I got to do this so I can do that. Okay, I'll do it. If you had told me I needed to learn Mandarin to do the thing I wanted to do, I would have studied Mandarin. But instead, someone told me I should get a doctorate, and it seemed like a good idea. I will also say that there has never been a day that I have woken up and said, you know what, really sucks that I have a doctorate, said no one ever, right? When I started my doctoral program in my very first semester, I was getting just killed, right? I had just come from Benin, where Creative had several projects. I'd been gone for months and months. I was, doing all kinds of important expat work in my head. And then suddenly I am a grad student with a backpack and showing up to class. And I was miserable. The first semester, I was absolutely miserable. And it just so happened that Creative gave me a call one day out of the blue, apropos of nothing. They had this big project in Senegal, and something had happened to the chief of party. I don't remember the details at this point, but something had happened to the chief of party, and they needed someone to go to Dakar, stat, and be the chief of party for the next 2, 3 years. And they called me. And I thought, wow, okay, universe, this is interesting because if you had asked me, the only reason I'm getting this doctorate in the first place and getting my butt kicked every day is so I can be chief of party. And here comes Creative out of the blue offering me this opportunity without the credentials. Maybe I should do it. And also, I'm getting my butt kicked, and Boston is cold. So I spent a couple days thinking about it, thinking about it, thinking about it. I was predisposed to walking away from the doctoral program, taking this job. And then I asked myself the question that I sometimes ask myself when I'm stuck. And it is, imagine yourself at 85 years old. Imagine you're on your deathbed, right? Whatever, morbid scenario you want to imagine. And you are thinking back over the course of your life. Will you regret that you dropped out of Harvard and did not get the doctorate? And if there is the slightest chance that that answer might be yes, then you should stay. And so I turned it around and around and around. And at the time, much to my chagrin, because I really wanted to drop out of that program, much to my chagrin, the answer was yes. I think I might regret this years from now. And so I turned down the opportunity. I stayed in the program. I got the doctorate. And I have to say, I have not regretted it one single day. I think the more education and the more credentials you have, it's like being able to speak multiple languages. It's just one more thing in your toolkit that can potentially serve you well. And at this particular moment, this particular social, cultural, economic, political moment, if school provides you the opportunity to press pause, to think, to reflect, to augment, to build, to connect, to network. I don't know. I'm not saying do it, but I'm not saying don't do it either. If it fits into what you think might be your longer term plans and it seems like it's a path that could serve you well, I wish I didn't have a doctorate said no one ever. So that's what I think.
Right on. Now on to yeah, the United Way, like what your job is now and like what you're working on and all, are you hiring?
So at the United Way, I'm the executive vice president for the international network. In 2 weeks, I will have been here 1 year. It has been the fastest year of my life. I cannot believe it. It's interesting what you said a moment ago about the United Way. We do have a big brand, right? I mean, everyone sort of knows the United Way. What most folks don't know is the full scope and scale of our brand. So there are approximately 1,100 United Ways around the world, roughly 1,000 here in the US. We like to say that we cover 95% of communities in this country, so a huge footprint. But what is less known is that there are roughly 100 United Ways in 35 other countries around the world. I didn't know that before a year ago. Most people don't know that. So my job as the executive vice president for the international network is to lead that global network of those 100 United Ways in the 35 countries around the world. And that means everything from providing strategic support, thought partnership, partnership and revenue diversification support, convenings, learnings, knowledge management, the whole 9 yards. It is funny that you ask if I am hiring. So for most of this year, I have been a team of one running 35 countries. So things have been a little bananas. I have vice presidents in the various regions who support the local United Ways in that region, but I have been a team of one. And I just hired someone who is on day two today to serve as my vice president for programs and partnerships. He also comes from this world, right? From the world of, he was formerly at Chemonics, and he comes from the world of USAID implementation partners. And then I have another person coming on board in another week or two to help with some of the operational and administrative pieces of what it means to manage a global network. So I was hiring, and I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you maybe saw the job description, but I would encourage people to continue checking back on our website. People are genuinely surprised that the United Way has this entire robust body of international and global work. And so part of my charge is to help change that by letting people know that we are here, we are doing this work, we are doing this work in deep partnership. And you know, the more I get to know folks who are like-minded and share a similar set of values and interests and commitments, the better off this work will be. So I look forward to more of this conversation and getting to know the folks on this call.
Thanks, Sonia. That's really helpful. So I'm sure you know that there might be some other questions on the chat that you can maybe chime into. But you mentioned Chemonics. That's a good segue to talk to Yaniv. You had your time there in the belly of the beast of one of the biggest places back in the day, but you've leveraged that to do a lot of different things. And I was really interested in your journey because it seems like it's come not a full circle, but maybe all the way. I don't know. It looks like you're back in this international development space after a time in the private sector. But I'm just curious to hear your story about like, you know, how did you what's been your professional journey from, you know, that time in international development to now?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Yaniv. I started my international development work, I guess, in the Peace Corps. I did Peace Corps in Ghana. When I came back, I got my master's in development from American University, and then I worked for a handful of USAID implementing partners, Chemonics, Management Sciences for Health, and later Deloitte. And in all of those, I was doing, at first at Chemonics, I did some project management, but it was mostly on the business development side. So working on responding to USAID proposals and helping organizations win those to implement the work. Um, I then moved to Los Angeles, and there was no such thing as working from home full time. That was just unheard of. It couldn't be done possibly. So I ended up leaving, and I went into private sector um, work initially with the X Prize Foundation, writing these global grand challenges. So I wrote a happiness X Prize. How can you measure happiness? And you know, objectively, we did um, a handful of really interesting projects while I was there. eventually I was a vice president for business development for a technology firm, and that was during COVID. And I realized how much I did not enjoy that work, and that I really wanted to come back to development. And so I started working with Head Global. And at Head Global, before America was great again, we provided surge capacity to USAID implementing partners. I'm not saying what I think about that. Um, with USAID implementing partners. So whenever their business development teams needed support to write proposals or do recruitment or write a management plan or help strategize or go to the field and find out, what does USAID really want for this project? We would do that work either ourselves or we would find consultants to do that. It's been about 4.5 years. We have now done a hard pivot to supporting um, many federal workers, but mostly either USAID staff or former staff from USAID implementing partners on their job search, on their job journey. So helping them translate that work from, there's a very specific way that we talk about the things that we do in international development. It is the reason why for those of you that have been in this work, why your friends and family have no idea what you do. Um, it's a lot of jargon. So we help them to translate that, to talk about their skills, their transferable skills. There's a lot of amazing transferable skills. You have to be able to talk about it in a way that really lands outside, not even just in the private sector, but just outside of USAID. Um, yeah, so pretty much writing resumes, crafting personalized job search strategies, um, um, interview coaching. So, as they're prepping for these interviews and they're outside of the sector, often they're a little bit nervous. So we help them kind of on a few different levels prep for those meetings. So yeah, I would say it's like full circle and then a little bit past now since it's, and looking back into the circle with, helping folks find work.
Yeah, you've lapped yourself. Um,
Yeah.
no, but
Mm.
so when I think about like an international development resume, things like, monitoring and evaluation, or, I've been training a lot of my students to be like adaptable generalists, right? A little bit about like almost program agnostic. You could do a lot of administrative oversight and just getting things done type work, but like it doesn't matter if it's like an ag project or a health project or an infrastructure project or something like that. And like in the private sector that you've seen, this is something that's totally foreign to me, and this is where I feel like I have a weakness as an advisor. I'll be honest, is like I don't really speak the language of the private sector, so to speak. It's just like this behemoth of this other world that I don't understand. Like if I talk to someone who's got an MBA and they're working for a company and they're talking about things, I don't understand it. And I'm wondering, like, to what extent, like, can you translate a typical, international development career of like you're a program officer, and you're managing something, like how do you translate that and to pivot into something new if you do want to go to the private sector?
Right. Um, I'll give you some specific examples, but just when I'm speaking, and I know there's folks on this call who are either have been with implementing partners or with USAID, and they think that their experience is so channeled into one thing that they can't, that others won't see them that way. If you were working in an HR in a paper company and then you went and did HR at Amazon, you wouldn't tell your friends that you're doing a hard pivot into technology, right? There are certain skills that you have that you are now applying to a different employer. And when people in the private sector switch between jobs and between industries, they focus on the work that they are capable of doing, not on the industry and the goals of that industry. So there's just this like switch that you have to kind of flip in order to not see yourself in that way. The next thing that I ask folks when they're nervous is I say, well, what's the largest project that you've managed? And today I spoke with someone who really, this was around the smallest that I've heard. And she said, well, it hasn't been as large as others. It's only $10 million. And I was like, cool. Who do you know in the private sector? How many of your private sector friends have touched a $10 million project? Like nobody. It's almost a matter of dumbing your skills down a little bit so that employers don't think that they're over hiring for a position. And there is a way to do that. But anyway, so just to give you a little bit of perspective, but things like, I managed budgets for multi-million dollar USAID contracts. I've done profit and loss management and financial risk oversight of millions of dollars in revenue. Um, I've done capture management, proposal writing, and business development. I've done complex sales, revenue growth, strategic planning, um, monitoring and evaluation, MEL, that's data analytics, impact assessment, and performance optimization. So these are all jobs and skills that are done essentially when you're working in international development. If you're not on the ground doing technical assistance and designing programs, you are doing um, complex project management, right? So it's staff, it's people management, it's client engagement, it's relationship management, it's budget management, it's risk and compliance. So it's just a matter of really thinking about your work, looking at job descriptions in the private sector, and when you look at a job description and you're like, oh, I could totally do that job, you then have to go back and write your resume using the bullets in that job description. Because for sure, if you've been in international development and you're going to share your resume, they won't understand what it is. They won't necessarily make the connections, but there are things that you can do. Um, and for those of you that are still in school, there's still skills that you're learning that are very much applicable to the private sector. Um, it's when I got my master's, it was essentially like a mini almost MBA, right? We had to do finance and we had to do accounting and we had to do project management and we had to, do a lot of the things that are done in the private sector. I've meandered a bit. Bring me
No,
back.
that's fine. This is super
Okay.
helpful. This is great. And I'm trying to also be conscious of time because I know Brett's been very patiently waiting here. But I had one more question, Yaniv, for networking purposes, along the lines of networking. What are some pitfalls that you've seen with people like when, I have my network, right? My network mostly is, return Peace Corps volunteers, alumni from my schools, people I've met along the way. When you are pivoting to a new area where you're looking for new networking connections, like what are some tips that you would have on, approaching people both totally cold to you or, maybe further removed from your own, you know, your regular, like your core network?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, I think in-person networking events, go to those. If there's career fairs, go to those. Um, but short of those, LinkedIn is everything. Everyone is on LinkedIn. And so if you don't have a LinkedIn page, you should have a LinkedIn page. That language that we were just talking about, have that language in there so that anybody, whether they're in international development or adjacent, corporate social responsibility or private sector fully, that they're, picking up on your presence there. When you, I'll back up a little bit. 80% of jobs are not listed. 80% of jobs are not listed, which means that 100% of applicants are applying for 20% of the jobs. And the rest are through networking, through internal referrals. And so, or there's recruiters out there who are looking for people without posting positions because they're not interested in getting those resumes. They know what they're looking for. So your LinkedIn page has to be strong. Next, when you reach out to people, especially if they're not in your network, you got to make it really easy for them to say yes. What they don't want is a conversation about how you need a job and how hard the market is out there, right? They don't know you. Even your friends can only hear it a few times. What people do love is to talk about themselves. And so, hey, I'm just out of school. I'm looking to get into corporate social responsibility. I've been tracking I was tracking your career on LinkedIn. I would love 15 minutes just to hear about your career journey. Do you have time to meet next week? And then it's just super simple. Sure, I can talk to you about my career journey for 15 minutes, easy. Once you've got that connection, at the end of that call, you can say, hey, listen, if a job opens up at XYZ Corp, would you mind if I reached out to you? And now you've got kind of permission to reach out and make a request without just reaching out to folks coldly. Mostly people will not, even if you do it the right way, people ignore it, just like you've ignored requests, from people that you don't know in your email or LinkedIn. But the most likely way to do it, the most likely way is to make it really easy for somebody to say yes and have them be the focus. Also, follow people on LinkedIn, comment on the things that they're posting, share their posts out and comment on it. even before you reach out to them. Share an article. You don't have to create your own content. Share something that you read that is really relevant to something that they said or posted about. And now, after you've done that for a bit, when you reach out to them for that 15-minute call, they already sort of recognize you because you're a stalker. No, they already sort of recognize you. And then it's just, it's more likely that they'll say yes.
100%. That is awesome, awesome advice. Thank you for touching on that, Yaniv. Brett, you know, I look at you and your background, and you're the kind of student, or you're the kind of young person where it's like, I would have seen your career and been like, oh my God, like I was so lucky to be in DC. It's like why I would move to DC is because like all these opportunities that you've had, like, so you've packed a ton of work and experience into a short period of time. And, it looks like, you're really building towards an international development career. And, you've been able to sort of pivot a little bit. How have you, can you just tell us about your career and how you've, navigated being, like a young person during like the craziest time ever, like, and what lessons have you learned?
Yeah, definitely. So, hi everyone. My name is Brett. I'm currently a membership associate on the strategy and development team at the Global Business Alliance, which is an organization that works with various internationally headquartered companies, private sector companies, and advocates on their behalf for fair integration here into the market into the US for mainly foreign direct investment. Prior to that, I worked at App Global, which I'm sure a lot of people may have heard of, was a pretty big USAID contractor, and I did project management there as a project management analyst for various projects, public health, macroeconomic growth, market systems development in Uganda, Indonesia, and in Barbados were the three projects I primarily worked on. And I pretty much did that since I graduated from undergrad last year at American University in May of 2024. So I never even went to grad school yet. So this is also super interesting for me to hear from that perspective of the journey to grad school eventually. But yeah, from a younger person's perspective, the market is really hard. I think that and then everyone knows that clearly, but I think being a younger entry level professional, there are pros and cons. Cons on the sense, obviously, you don't have as much as experience, or you may not have the degrees already, but pros in the sense that you can pivot. You still have that, you thought that you can pivot. You haven't been in a career for 20 or 30 years already, really buckled in. As a younger person, 100%, I showed, what I did is I took one of the skills that I had in my interest, mainly in economics and in project management. And that's kind of what I ran off of from going from app to Global Business Alliance. Because Global Business Alliance, they don't really do international development. That's not what the organization is. It's a domestic focused organization. But I showed how I did business development at ACT. I did project management work at ACT. And I was just interested in the ideas of economic growth, different types of things. My other colleagues, I know some were more focused on public health or environmental studies. These are all things that are within the international development sphere that 100% have applicability in domestic sector jobs, whether that be private sector, public sector, nonprofit, NGO, etc. So that's my biggest advice, and that's pretty much what I tried to do. Is as soon as I, found out I was furloughed, what jobs can I look for that also, go with my skill set at ACT? And I primarily did what you mentioned too, is utilizing LinkedIn as a tool, not just for the job application, not just for the job postings, but even if it's just random people that you really think their LinkedIn history is interesting, I would cold message them. I had a template. I got LinkedIn Premium, which you get the first 2 months free, which allows you to message anybody. You don't have to already connect with them. You can just message them blindly. And a lot of the time, I would say maybe 50 to 60% of the time, you would get a response, even if it's not somebody you already know. I would look for something that you have in common. Maybe that's an American grad too. Maybe it's someone who once worked at ACT or worked in a similar company. And you start off with a prompt that, makes them feel more comfortable than not just like some random person. And as long as you don't come off as like, you mentioned like greedy or, you want something immediately. A lot of the time people do love to talk about how they did it. And I find that to be very helpful, even if it isn't for a specific job recommendation or reference, just to hear about how they went from their job, all the way 20 years ago to where they are now is super helpful for younger people, especially.
Yeah, I love that you brought up LinkedIn Premium. So that was worth it for you. How long did you have it before you started seeing, results? And I mean, I assume you probably let it lapse after you got your job, or I mean, I'm just curious about that, if it was worth the investment.
I totally think it was worth it. I mean, I only had to pay for 1 month, but for me, there was a dead zone for a while. For the first month or so, when I started applying to jobs, I didn't hear back from anything. And I would just continue to do, apply to the traditional style. do what, and you've mentioned like reaching out to people, cold message on LinkedIn, but also there would, especially if you promote your LinkedIn well and, state exactly what your experiences are, people can and will reach out to you. You'll get an occasional recruiter, not just on LinkedIn, but ZipRecruiter, Indeed, all different other sort sites. I've had people just call or randomly message you, "Well, look, this is an interesting position. I saw your page, would you be interested in a phone screening?" So it's not only what you can bring forward to them, but even people, as long as you promote yourself well, can come to you. So because my first job was at Apt, obviously that was my first full-time job ever. What I tried to do in the time leading up to that, probably starting around sophomore year in college, is I kind of knew I wanted to work in international development. Maybe not super specifically, but I knew international affairs. So I pretty much utilized my setting of being here in DC, but even if you're elsewhere, you can still do that to build up as strong of an internship career path as possible so that you're set for when you do want to find a full-time job. Because I've heard many people say, and especially nowadays, a lot of times for younger people, they're looking to see what kind of work experience they already have rather than just the academic style, like just through their degree or through their coursework. They really want to see what have you done in the real world, the applied, not just the theoretical, like Sonia was saying, in the theoretical idealist side, but in the applied sense, have you gone out and actually worked, at a think tank or NGO or nonprofit on the ground? I had the privilege of doing a fellowship in Kenya, which was through American University. So I always tell people, if you want to work in some sort of global sense, I really always say go study abroad and see if you can do an internship while you're abroad through the school or some sort of work experience you can put on your resume, no matter where it is in the world, that just shows that you've worked, in a foreign setting too.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for telling your story. Um, we're at 47 of 48 of the hour. What kinds of questions do we have for each other? Like Sonia or Yaniv, do you have any questions for each other, or Brett? Or Brett, do you have questions for Sonia or Yaniv?
Well, I don't have a question. I just want to double down on the conversation about LinkedIn. I would say, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe I kind of dabbled with LinkedIn, but wasn't really serious about it. And then I was in a transition moment and was working with a coach, and he really extolled like the virtues of LinkedIn, and now I swear by it. So there are so many ways in which I think people could leverage LinkedIn better. Even the comments that Brett was just making, right? Like cold calling, reaching out to people, or cold emailing, reaching out to people, yes. But if you and that person have a connection in common, before you reach out to me, and I don't know you, see who we have in common, right? And then reach out to that person and ask that person to reach out to me. I do that right now today. Right now today, I would say, "Hey, Brett, I'm really interested in meeting Scott Webb, and I see the two of you are connected. Do you know him, like for real, for real? Do you actually know him? You do? Great. Would you send him an email and see if he's interested in talking to me?" So you should really think about leveraging LinkedIn and leveraging sort of every possible avenue. Scott, you asked a moment ago about if I'd done any hiring. So this job I just mentioned a moment ago with the VP, that is his second day, we did post that, right? We posted it on the United Way's website, and then I posted it on LinkedIn. And I took it down after about 6 or 7 days because we had almost 300 people apply for that one job, right? The response was overwhelming. A lot of folks, just side chatted me and said, "Hi, Sonia, I'm interested, da, 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 da." I tried to respond as best I could. I actually tried to be really responsive because I had been there a whole bunch of times myself. But there were a whole lot of people who figured out that we had someone in common, and they put that person on me, right? And that person has my email address, has my phone number, and said, "Hey, I know you're getting a lot of resumes, but I really want you to look at Brett because he is my guy and he's, top notch." So there's no harm or shame in using other routes to get to the people you want. In fact, it's the smartest thing you should do.
Definitely,
You don't ask,
definitely.
you don't get.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, this is awesome. There's been a couple questions that have come up in the chat. Natalie Luna asked, what are some roles for mid-career professionals within international development? It's a bit difficult to transition when you've been in one industry for a long time with very limited experience in international job development because the job postings tend to be coded with very technical knowledge or skill sets that are not entry level either. It's not clear at times how to effectively translate your transferable skills and experience.
Um, I mean, there's like USAID adjacent, right? So there's still like UN, World Bank, and the European donors, GIZ, CETA, FCDO. There's foundations in the US, right? There's Gates and Skoll and Ford, tons of NGOs, think tanks, universities. So there's a lot of areas where it wouldn't take much translating at all um, of your experience. I mean, it would take some translating, but not much. Otherwise, there are jobs like in corporate social responsibility, in the private sector, impact investing, right? So like social impact, right? How can we have our company do good work in Africa, based on the products and services that we offer. So there are those types of positions that are very, very much aligned with um, um, yeah, with the skills that you develop in international development. Um, I would say um, global operate, so like cross-cultural communications, project design and evaluation, stakeholder coordination, policy and research work. There's really a lot that can be done. You do have to, though, figure out how to say talk about your experience in a way that will land. And an easy way to do that is look at the job descriptions and see how they are talking about the same work, but in different terms. Generally, most jobs are not hiring for very technical skills. I mean, there are those, sure. Like if you're going to be a coder, but you've like in international development, you do a little bit of everything, and there is a way to talk about that in a way that's really powerful.
I chime in and just add to that? I
Yeah,
think
please.
once again, I think you are spot on with the advice and guidance. I'm listening to you. I should be taking notes. But a few years ago, well, probably more than a few, I don't know, 10 years ago, I had been in the international development world. I was looking to make a pivot. As I said, I live in Chicago. At the time, I was the education director for Oprah's foundations, doing her work in South Africa, building her schools. And, she announced that she was going to end the show. And the show, of course, was the money engine to the philanthropy. So the writing was on the wall. I decided that I loved Chicago and I did not want to move. Well, the universe of international development opportunities in Chicago is not the same as in DC. So I had a choice to make. And so I decided to stay in Chicago and to pivot to domestic work. And I remember so well at the time, people would look at my resume and they'd say, wow, you've done all this really interesting stuff and interesting places around the world. But what's that got to do with this job, this very US focused domestic job here? And exactly the way that my colleagues here were just discussing, it was my job to figure out how to talk about this international global work that I have been doing for the past 10 years in a way that was resonant with a very domestic focus that I was pursuing. And it was not quite as hard as I thought. I had to actually put some intentionality behind it. And I think, Brett, the way you were talking about how you translate those skills into other sectors, I think is exactly spot on. But, at the time, as I said, I'd been doing all this work around gender and education reform. And, I created a whole narrative around families all over the world care about certain things. They care about their children. They want the best for their children. That, they want da, 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 da. This very sort of aspirational talk. And that is true whether you are in Argentina or Atlanta, right? But it was incumbent upon me to make it easy for them to draw that through line between what I have been doing for the past 10 years at Creative, at Oprah, et cetera, and think about how I applied that to a US context. At the time, I remember I was applying for a senior level job in an early childhood organization, birth to five, early childhood, focused on federal policy. I never worked in any of those things, like not a single day in my life, right? But then I got this job, and it was all because I figured out how to draw the through line between the education, reform, and community-based work that I had been doing internationally, and brought it over to this U.S. piece of work. So I would also just say, I know we all love the international work. It's the heart song for so many of us, and the world is changing. And if there is even the slightest possibility that you might be interested in something, even for a short period of time, that is not international focused, but is domestic in its orientation, that could also be a really interesting complement to your resume and to your skill set. And I don't know that I would have thought that before a set of circumstances made me decide to go domestic, as I say, right? Now in hindsight, I'm so glad that I did, because I can speak from both perspectives, internationally and domestically. And it is true what I said, the through line between some of the issues is not nearly as dissimilar as people would assume. The context is sometimes different, the scope and scale is sometimes different, but at the heart, what families and communities are striving for and what they want to be true for themselves and for the world around them is often quite universal. So I would just offer that as another way to think about this transition moment.
Awesome. A couple other questions queued up here in the chat. Got a question that Julie flagged. She says, "Hi, I'm a current junior at William and Mary majoring in international relations, and I'm hoping to go in international development for a career. I was wondering what advice you may all have for students coming out of undergrad trying to get engaged in the field. Should she retreat and go back to grad school and ride this out, or should she try and work somewhere and gain skills?" I added that last sentence. I don't know, Yaniv, you unmuted. Maybe you
I
had
don't
a
know.
thought.
I'm thinking about if I were an undergrad, would I go to grad school today for international development? I'm not sure, but that's not because necessarily of the industry. It's because I don't know how valuable I don't know that that's the most valuable master's degree. I think it is very valuable, but I think that there are others as well that maybe knowing what we know now may be more transferable, like an MBA or something else that you're really passionate about that could still be leveraged for international development if that's what you end up doing later, but that's maybe more transferable to other industries as well. I think that the graduate degree in international development is very transferable. You just have to do some explaining. And that's just my opinion. I'm not right. That's not true. You know, it's what I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, that's all we can ever do, right? Just react and adapt. And another question, there are some people on this call that are like, SID people that are just sort of like longtime experienced people. So Rebecca asks, I'm a 15-year global health professional currently in DC. My family has an opportunity to move to Europe. Would you all recommend that, or do you think it would be just as contracted a market for global health as it is in DC? I don't know. That's kind of particular to that opportunity, I would think, but what do you all think? I mean, the ecosystem in Europe is different. I think, if you're mission driven and the work is interesting, I think there's definitely issues with, relocating your family if that's, part of it. I think living outside the United States might be a blessing for a while for, people who are into that, making that move. The grass is always greener. I don't know. I don't know. That's a personal decision. It's based on your own logistics, I would think. So we're almost done here. Yeah, and work visas were brought up as an issue as well. Let's see, one person asked about a recording. I was just, double checking that there's any other questions. All right. So we're basically almost done. Are there any sort of parting thoughts that we want to impart people with? Yaniv, you're still unmuted, so you have the floor.
Sure. Um, this is not the end of the world. There are plenty of really great jobs out there. Um, it's always there's plenty there really are a lot of really great jobs where you still can do the kind of work that you wanted to do, even if it's not exactly that. And I'm still optimistic that development will come back to the US in some form or another. It may not look the same, but this does not mean that you have to ditch your dreams or what you've been studying for the last 4 years or where you've been working for the last 40 years. Um, yeah, they're just not. What you'd have to do is be able to talk about yourself in a way that really lands. One last thing. Your resume is not a list of everything that you've ever done. It is a marketing document. Its goal is to get you in the door for a job interview, and then it's up to you to kick ass once you're in there. So when you're looking at your resume, like how can you make it more engaging and easier to skim and just really get to the point of what you've done with results, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. Thank you. And Brett, any last things you want to say?
I totally agree with everything what Yaniv said. I put in the chat too, another thing you can do, obviously, especially for younger professionals, we have the Young Professionals in Development Network here at SID-US. Totally join it. It's free. You don't even need to be a member to join. We host in-person events. It's totally good to just network with other younger people. Sometimes we host other organizations like Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, different things of that nature. Events like those have always been super helpful for me. I always find it very good to speak with other people. Even besides just SID, I know, like, for instance, there's other upcoming events for younger people. There's the World Bank Youth Summit that is in a couple weeks. That's another great networking opportunity, for younger professionals. There's stuff with IMF, OCED. So there's all different types of things, especially here if you're in the DC or the DMV or even virtually, that besides just you need to have an internship or a job, just getting your name out there and connecting with other people has been super helpful.
That's awesome. And before you get on the plane, Sonia, I know you're about
Um,
to like head off to the airport.
No, no, it's all good. I would second everything that these two have said. And the only other thing I would add to that is, it's so easy now post-COVID to just rely on everything virtual. But sometimes I say this to myself all the time, you got to get out of yoga pants and you actually have to go show up somewhere. So to the extent that there are in-person convenings, it's just a whole different dynamic. It's a different touch point. And the thing that I think sort of learned later in life, if you are at a talk, you are at a gathering and you see some person who's interesting and you think, oh my God, they're so senior or they're so whatever, I can never approach them. Like 100%. This is my 50-something-year-old self saying this to my 20-something-year-old self. Approach them. I play this game in well, I used to, now I don't have to, but for a while I played this game in my head of like, what is literally the worst that could happen if I approach Brad? Like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, he's not going to slap me and throw his drink in my face like in the movies, right? The worst that could happen is he might sort of nod politely and then gradually go off to someone who he finds more interesting. I can take that, right? Like my ego can take that. The best thing that could happen is I might have a really interesting conversation with him. He might learn something really interesting about me. That next time he's in a setting and he hears about an opportunity, he might think of me because that thing that someone said earlier about most jobs are not posted, this job was not posted. It was all about relationships. And you can't really cement those relationships, as much as I wish it were true, in your yoga pants at home. So if you can show up somewhere, show up somewhere.
I love it. That's a great, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for this amazing advice. This has been a really cool experience. Sonia, Yaniv, Brett, really appreciate it. Thank you, Julie, for organizing this panel. Thank you, Dan, for supporting all the IT and setup and logistics and stuff like that. Julie, you probably have a slide or two to share before you turn off the recording.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. Um, Yeah, we'll do the last two slides. So, people would ask, thank you first. Thank you, Scott, Brett, Sonia, Yaniv. This was really wonderful. And yeah, I still can't believe that 80% of the jobs are not listed, Yaniv. That's crazy to me, but it's good to know. Good to know. It really does impact your strategy for looking for new jobs. Um, all right, so I wanted to mention an upcoming event for institutional members. That's some of the people on this call. I know that some of you are not members, but we do have this one for institutional members that are looking for new funding sources, given all that has changed in the U.S. administration. So we encourage you to come if you are an institutional member. We will have other events. We have some more on kind of in the works. So please sign up for our newsletter if you're not on our newsletter. Join us. Like us on LinkedIn. Follow us. I guess follow us. Follow us on LinkedIn because we are pretty active. And as you've learned from all the speakers today, that it's LinkedIn is the place really right now for international development. And then finally, the last slide is if you have, we're going to send out a survey. We'll send out the recording. If you have any ideas or any suggestions for improvement, please let us know. We're always looking for we want to be better. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to the members that are online today. Thank you. Your support is so important to us. And for those that are not members and you're interested in becoming a member, let us know. It's pretty affordable for students. It starts as well, yeah, it starts as low as $35, and it goes up to 90. So it's pretty affordable. But reach out to me. I put my email in the chat, and we will hope to see you at the next event. And thank you again, Scott, Brett, Sonia, and Yaniv. And have a great afternoon, evening,
Thank
morning,
you.
wherever you are. All right,
Bye, everyone.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, see you guys.